When we supply Israel with the weapons that kill 45,000 Palestinians in Gaza, it could well come back to haunt us in that way. It could come back to haunt us in other ways. I certainly don't see it as doing us any good. And, this is a case where Biden had the leverage to bring things to a close earlier, but for whatever reason, he didn't use it.
What about the Middle East, Bob? What do you make of what's going on in Syria right now? It's world historic, it feels to me. Rumblings of tectonic plates moving.
Yeah, I think so. Iran's position has been greatly weakened. Iran had this kind of axis of resistance thing going on with Hezbollah in particular. Now Hezbollah is decimated, and the land bridge by which Iran got weapons to Hezbollah is no longer. I don't think there's much chance that under
that's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, it depends on how Israel. It depends on how Israel uses the advantage. If Israel would do what I wish they'd do, and say, if you look at what Israel would have described as its the existential threat constantly facing it a year and a half ago, it's gone, right? Israel is in a very strong position, and I would like them to recognize that whatever nuclear deal Iran wouldn't do last time around after Trump got out of the nuclear deal, they did do. They probably will do now. It just isn't hard through diplomatic means, I think, for Israel to get the confident assurance that Iran's not building a nuclear weapon. You can have a very intrusive inspection regime, monitoring regime. Iran is not in a position to strike a very hard bargain. If it turns out I'm wrong, fine, then I'm wrong. But what I worry is that Israel's not even going to explore that possibility. They're just going to try to take out the nuclear infrastructure, which isn't at the moment a weapons program, but it could become one in short notice.
I just heard John Mearsheimer tell somebody that they don't have, Israel, the capacity to take out Iran's nuclear program root and branch, that they need the United States in order to be able to accomplish that goal as a military objective.
That's what I've heard. Israel could do damage on its own, but I don't think, who knows? I don't think the Biden administration would give them the active U.S. military participation they'd need to do maximal damage. Trump might. Who knows? Trump might. And so they may wait. I don't know what's going to happen, but I've heard the same thing you've heard.
Israel is at war with Iran, undeclared, but de facto. Is that not the case? The U.S. has a vital interest in seeing Israel prevail in that conflict with Iran, does it not? That's a question.
I don't think there has to be a conflict. I think in general our policy toward the Middle East has been really unfortunate. I don't think we've benefited from endlessly supplying Israel with weapons while they wreak much more destruction and death in Gaza than they had to for purpose of their own actual national security, in my view. I think that's bad for our national security. If you look at the homegrown terrorism, as they called it, in between kind of 9/11 and recently, and by the way, I think without that, Trump might have never become president. If you look at like when it happened and how he exploited it and so on, those San Bernardino, the Pulse nightclub in Florida, whatever, just almost uniformly, the guys who did it said, "Here's why we're doing this." It's not because you're a Christian nation. It's not that. It's because your military is killing Muslims in some majority Muslim nation somewhere. So, when we supply Israel with the weapons that kill 45,000 Palestinians in Gaza, it could well come back to haunt us in that way. It could come back to haunt us in other ways. I certainly don't see it as doing us any good. And, this is a case where Biden had the leverage to bring things to a close earlier, but for whatever reason, he didn't use it.
Well, how about this argument? The alternative to supporting Israel, providing those weapons, backing it in international forums, and so on, is to watch the slow, inexorable, irresistible defeat of that project, the Israel project, the Zionist project. That would be a world historic setback for the West, for the United States in particular, and for Western civilization more broadly. Netanyahu was right when he came to Congress and he said it's not a clash as Samuel Huntington would have had it between civilizations. What we have here is a conflict between civilization and barbarism. I think that's how he put it. The United States stands with our ally, our friend, the only liberal democracy in the region in a very tough neighborhood, Israel. And that means sometimes when the SHIT hits the fan, supplying weapons, even when it might, in the short run, redound on the margins to some blowback that's unpleasant and so on. Yes, we know that. We live in a difficult world, but we have to make the choices that we have to make. The alternative to support is not supporting and watching Israel go down the drain. How's that as a good outcome?
I mean, first of all, I would say 36 hours after the October 7th attack, horrible as it was, Israel was secure again. Maybe I'm wrong, it's 48 hours. But, and certainly, even if they had rolled them back, they were caught totally unawares, okay? It was like a worst case scenario, sleeping on the job, partly because part of the military was deployed, helping settlers do what they do. And we can talk about that if you want. But, totally caught by surprise. Within 48 hours, totally under control. I mean, Hamas succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations militarily. But within 48 hours, totally under control. Not one guy still in Israel, okay? So if that's like the worst case, if that's when you're totally caught off guard, the fact is that by and large, deterrence had worked for Israel. And if they want to argue that we had to really teach them a lesson after this one, well, I mean, how long does the lesson need to go on? I mean, I had Tom Friedman on my podcast, it was close to a year ago now, maybe not quite. And we were talking about, well, when can Bibi stop the war? And I said, I guess if he kills this Sinwar guy, certainly he can declare victory then. And Tom said, well, there's also this Mohammed Daif guy, or whatever his name is, who runs the military Hamas. And we were both assuming that, well, if he could just do that, I mean, he could just have a festival in his honor. It would be so obvious he had vanquished his foe. Well, he's now killed them both, and he's still killing people in Gaza. I mean, this is so far beyond. I mean, it isn't just beyond what their national security needs demand. I think it's. I think it's moving in the opposite direction. There's so many embittered people in Gaza, and this was happening from the beginning. I mean, look, 1 in 50 people in Gaza has been killed. Let me see, more than that actually. And in terms of maimed, permanently wounded, if you want killed and maimed, wounded, it's probably 1 in 20. So basically, everyone in Gaza is related to one of these people. Okay, and you just don't forget that. So if they think this is the way you put an end to all terrorism, we'll see. But I don't think, I've long thought that the policies favored by so-called pro-Israel camps are often not really good even for Israel, much less for the U.S.
Well, let me go on the record saying I have more than a little bit of sympathy for the concerns that you've expressed about the humanitarian disaster which the Israel war in Gaza is prosecuting. I've said as much. I've been in argument with my friend and colleague John McWhorter here at the Glenn Show about that very subject. I published at the Substack that I maintain in a little small essay setting out my concerns. But I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever encountered as much anger and accusations of bigotry and anti-Semitism directed at me as I have and as I am getting for an occasional expression of anguish about tens of thousands of dead civilians in Gaza and about my government's complicity in the killing.